This video is basically going to be a cheat sheet masterclass on how to set up and execute the seated leg curl. And there are many things that I'm going to tell you in this video that perhaps you have never heard before, which are actually very simple tips to set up and execute this. So first of all, there's the setup. How do we orient ourselves on the machine to set ourselves up for success? The first thing we need to focus on is pad placement, right? The thigh pad. And the thigh pad should ideally be as close to the knee as you can get it without it actually interrupting anything related to the knee's motion. So in short, basically just have the pad as low as you can on your quads, but make sure that it's not touching your shin cap. Make sure that it's not interfering in any way with your shin cap's ability to move. All right, we don't want it on top of the shin cap. That's number one. And number two is try to get the pad oriented so that it's not at an angle, right? So you see how this is a flat angle and it can kind of push down into the leg around 90 degrees. If you were to orient the seat pad at a different angle, let's say when you smush it down, it's kind of sitting like this, it's going to awkwardly put more pressure on one side of the leg. And that's what that in essence is going to force to happen, is you're going to be constantly peeling away from this pad. And that's going to be no good when we look at how we can actually focus on execution. So number one is shin pad. Number two is going to be hip angle, and specifically how hip angle relates to the backside of the seat. So this will be a highly individual thing, but what I would recommend for you is finding the position wherein when you, let's say, film yourself on the seated leg curl, as you're going through the motion, you're not seeing a ton of like bending and rounding and bending and rounding. We don't want to try to turn this into a thing where we're moving our spine all over the place, just because the hamstrings, at least 3 of the 4, are anchored at the hip. So some people will feel more comfortable with this. The more forward that you lean, as long as this stays relatively still, the femur, the leg stays still, the more forward you lean, the more hamstring stretch you'll get. But you don't want to just mindlessly be leaning forward and yanking yourself forward. Just lean forward enough to where you feel like a little bit of stretch in this part of your hamstrings, but while also at the same time you're not sort of flopping between rounding and arching and rounding and arching. Now also what hip angle you use should be dependent on how you can sort of interact with the seat. So I'll just draw the top side of the seat here, but you want to basically make sure that your upper back is pressed hard into the seat. We'll talk more about this in execution and specifically how this relates to execution, but you want to make sure that you basically cover what we have so far when it comes to the setup. Number one, the pad placement and that sort of 90-degree push. Number two, a comfortable hip angle, and hip angle which allows you to stretch the hamstrings without you flopping all over the place. And then number three, a solid foundation and contact of your upper back pressing into the pad that way. Execution and setup are intimately related, and they're intimately related because all of the things that we're paying attention to in the setup are going to essentially serve as our anchors, as our physical contacts off of which we can create force into the pad. And the pad, specifically in terms of placement, could really be anywhere, sort of on the bottom half of the shin. You don't need to be super specific about this, but I recommend starting out just somewhere in this zone, like bottom third of the shin. And so if we sort of orient ourselves here in terms of where the pad might be, this is, sort of the average placement above the ankle, below the knee. And, if any of you are uncomfortable with the pad smushing into your calves, just move it a little bit farther down so it's on that calf tendon as opposed to the belly of the calf. Now, super important is to consider the direction that the pad is actually pushing you, because not many people think about the fact the pad is actually changing directions as you move it. So in the top position, where is the pad pushing the shin? Well, it's pushing the shin directly upward because the pad arcs with the shin. And so as the user curls down into this bottom position, right, the pad, of course, stays relatively in that same spot. But now where is the pad pushing the individual? Well, it's no longer pushing this way. That wouldn't make any sense. It would just slide up your leg if that were the case. The pad is now pushing the individual this way. So in the top position, what we have to think about is we have to think about driving the pad downward against the direction that the pad is shoving. So in the top position, we might say, okay, drive the pad toward the floor as hard as you can. However, in the bottom position, we're no longer driving down because the pad is no longer pushing up. The pad is pushing forward. So where do we need to drive ourselves or drive our feet? Backward. A cue I like to give for the bottom is imagine your heel sort of directing upward in this way, almost toward your butt. So it's down and then back. But why did I say that the setup is intimately related to the execution? Well, because when the execution is considered, the direction of this pad is considered, and with that, we need to think about, okay, what do we need to focus on more in the setup at various points in the range? Because if the resistance is changing how it's acting on us, we also need to be able to push into different things at different points in the range, at least predominantly. So if I'm pushing down against the pad, what do I need to sort of push upward into? Well, I need to push upward into the pad. So in this top position, when your leg is more straight, your attention and your focus should really be predominantly on this shin pad, or this thigh pad rather. Because when your attention is on the thigh pad, you can really push down. You think about it like a teeter-totter or a seesaw. If you push down, you need something to push up into, or else your whole body is just going to fly upward. So in the top position, we might say that the thigh pad is of utmost importance, but what starts to become more important toward the bottom? Well, of course, the thigh pad is still there. It's still important. We still need to have it firmly against us. So make sure you don't lose contact with the thigh pad in the bottom. But once you get to the bottom, look at this arrow. Where is this arrow pointing? It's pointing this way. So we need something to prevent our bodies from sliding in this direction. And this is where the handles become very important, right? So all these pads have handles on them or something similar where you can basically take your arms, just imagine these arms are, you know, as long as they are here. And what we need to focus on is pushing the handles this way. Why? Well, because pushing the handles this way, remember what I said earlier, allows us to do what? It allows us to push ourselves backward. So putting it really simply, if the pad is pulling forward, we got to move ourselves backward. And if the pad is pushing upward, we got to move ourselves downward. So when the pad is up, going up to down relative to our, shins here and relative to our bodies, we need to focus on really firm contact with the thigh pad against us down. But when the shin pad is in the bottom pulling us forward, we need to really concentrate on these handles and pushing ourselves backward so that we don't get tossed forward. Right? So overall, this is kind of like the roadmap for the leg curl, which is pay attention to obviously your initial setup. Again, thigh contact on the pad is low, but not on top of the knee. Contact of the upper back is never lost. The hip angle is comfortable. And then also shin pad pushes up. So we focus on this contact a little bit more on the top. And then thigh pad is pulling forward. So we focus on the shove a little bit more in the bottom. So you can consider the seated leg curl, and really any form of a leg curl, could be a lying leg curl, a standing leg curl, whatever it happens to be, pay attention to the fact that this pad and this shin are moving through arcs, right? Which means that at different points, they're moving in different directions. And if you don't account for the change in direction of this pad and the change of direction that you need to be pushing opposite to that, and then also the fact that when you push opposite to that, these contact emphases change, then you're going to end up doing all kinds of things that are not related to the goal of just training the muscles that bend the knee. So in summary, don't lose contact here, but focus on it more on the top than the bottom. Never lose contact of the handles and you pushing yourself backward, but focus on that more on the bottom as compared to the top. And keep in mind that this also applies to any exercise that you do, let's say like a curl or like a triceps extension, where your limb segment is moving through an arc. And this is especially important on something like a preacher curl machine, where the machine is in fact also changing direction in a very similar way as it is here. You could also think about this in the context of a leg extension, wherein in the bottom of a leg extension, your leg is here and you're pushing forward, and in the top of the leg extension, you're actually pushing upward. So a leg extension just being a seated leg curl in reverse. So just keep in mind and really keep it simple, by the way. It doesn't, maybe this was new or complicated to some of you, but once you kind of get the good idea of like, all right, I got my thigh pad contact, I got my handle contact, and I know at which points I need to focus on either of those, then you're going to be good to go on your leg curls. And if you've never applied this sort of thought process of just thinking more about the physics of the motion as compared to exactly just squeezing muscles kind of arbitrarily, this will make a world of a difference for you.